And so people with disabilities, I mean, in any social movement, when a minority group rises up and starts to take power, they say, we're going to own the language. And that's what people of color did. They said, we don't want to be called the N-word anymore. We don't want to be called Negro anymore. We want to be called black. And they went, and we don't want to be called colored anymore. We want to be called black. And they went so far as to deconstruct what it meant to be black by saying black is beautiful. And women, and the women's movement took the power back and said, don't call me sweetie, honey, you know, I'm not, you know, I'm your secretary, but I'm a waitress. I'm not going to, you know, get your coffee too. You know, you get your own coffee. I'll type your letters, but I'm not going to get your coffee. And so women said, you know, call me Kathie or call me Miss Snow, but don't call me honey, sweetie, baby anymore. And the same is true. I mean, you can look at any, you know, so-called minority group and see the same things have happened. And so we have to be respectful of people first language because they're the ones who say, we don't want to be called this anymore. We want to be called this way. And so, you know, we have to look at them as people first. They are people first. I mean, they're not they're not from another planet. They're not from, you know, some subspecies of humanity. And so people first language is really, far from being PC, people first language is about having good manners. People first language is about respect. People first language is more about the golden rule than anything else, of treating other people the way you want to be treated. And again, thinking about a disability is just a medical diagnosis, and everybody's got a medical diagnosis. I don't want to be known as the hysterectomy lady, or, you know, I don't want to be known, or, you know, the wart lady, or the big butt man, or the, you know, whatever your medical diagnosis is. None of us would want to be known by that. And so, you know, it just becomes that simple act of respect of making sure that a person is a person first. And I don't even like the term disabled. If we talk about disabled people, if you look at the federal definition of disabled, in the IRS code, the federal definition is that you are unable to work. It's like, well, I mean, because that's the whole thing about SSI and SSDI, and, you know, that you're unable to work. And so it's like, I would hope that we want people with disabilities to work. When my son was about 13 years old, a man came up to him, you know, minding his own business, we're in the mall or something. And this older man, I say older man, got to be careful talking about older people because I'm getting to be one, but this man came up to my son and he said, you know, some men would call you a son even though it's not your real son, but they call everybody a son. The man came up to him and he said, oh, son, he says, I see that you're disabled. I mean, look at Benjamin in his wheelchair. And Benjamin got that pointer finger up and he said, sir, excuse me. Sir, he said, I have a disability, but I am not disabled. And you see just the difference in self-perception. And so I think that, you know, we have to be respectful of people. You know, having a disability is not a big deal. Let's not make it a big deal. It shouldn't be a big deal. But if you say that somebody's disabled, that means that, you know, the legal definition is that they're unable to work. And so when people say that they're disabled, it's like, really? Like, you can never have a job? And you know, one last thing about people first language is to think about stuff, I mean, let's go beyond people first language, but it's part of it, of how we use language in general, that whenever you will hear on a radio talk show, or you'll, you know, some kind of, you know, comedian, even in your own homes, you will look at somebody and say, oh, that guy is such a moron. Boy, isn't she an idiot? You know, that is just insane. I mean, we hear these words all the time. And, of course, the one we're familiar with, you are such a retard. Well, anytime we use those terms, I mean, think about every single thing I just said, plus many more, are medical diagnoses of people with developmental disabilities or of mental health conditions. And so what does that say about our society? That we have taken the medical diagnoses of certain groups of people and turn them into pejorative, you know, horrifying insults. If your neighbor, you know, borrows your lawnmower and doesn't bring it back, and under your breath you mutter, that guy's an idiot, would you say instead, that guy is such a diabetic? You know, and people can laugh about that. It's like, well, why don't we call him a diabetic? Because we don't devalue people with diabetes. We haven't marginalized them. But people with, you know, other conditions that, again, pretty much, you know, developmental disabilities and mental health conditions, we have turned their diagnoses into insults. And so we have to watch our own language. We have to be aware of the power of language. I mean, again, language creates the reality of the world we live in. So we talk about all these people being, you know, disabled or this or that or the other. That's how we're going to see them, and that's how we're going to treat them. And so the first way that you devalue somebody is through the words that you use about them. So we don't want people to be devalued. We have to first watch our language. But those of us within the disability community, it has to start with us. We can't expect people in the bigger society to make changes if we don't make the changes ourselves. So we have a huge responsibility to use language that is always accurate and respectful.